Captain Jake Martinez stood on the bridge of the UES Pioneer and watched the stars drift past the main window. 3 months had passed since they left Earth orbit and began their mission to find new worlds for human colonies. The ship moved through space like a silver needle threading through black cloth, its engines humming quietly as they pushed toward the Kepler system. Lisa Park sat at her station and monitored the communication arrays. She had been listening to space for weeks now, hoping to catch any signal that might tell them about planets worth visiting. Most of the time she heard only the natural sounds of space, radiation from distant stars, the whisper of solar winds, and the occasional burst from a pulsar spinning somewhere in the dark. But today was different. "Captain," Lisa called out, her voice tight with something Jake had never heard before. "I need you to look at this right away." Jake walked over to her station and looked at the display screen. Lines and waves danced across the monitor in patterns that meant nothing to him, but Lisa knew how to read them like words on a page. She pointed to a section of the screen where the waves looked different from the rest. "This signal is coming from the fourth planet's moon," she said. "It's not natural. Something made this signal on purpose." Jake felt his heart speed up. In all of human history, no one had ever found proof that other thinking beings lived among the stars. Earth had sent radio signals into space for decades, hoping someone would answer back, but the universe had stayed silent. Now, finally, they might have found what humanity had been searching for. "Can you tell what kind of signal it is?" Jake asked. Lisa worked at her controls for several minutes, feeding the signal through different filters and programs. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. "It's a distress beacon," she said. "Someone is asking for help." Jake felt excitement mix with worry in his chest. First contact with aliens should have been a moment of celebration, but if they were in trouble, celebration would have to wait. He turned to his crew and began giving orders. "Dan, get your security team ready for a landing mission. Amy, I want you to come with us. If we're really meeting aliens for the first time, we'll need our best scientist. There. Lisa, keep monitoring that signal and tell me if anything changes." Dan Cooper had been in charge of ship security for 5 years. He was a big man with steady hands and quick thinking, exactly the kind of person you wanted watching your back, on an unknown world. He nodded and left the bridge to gather his equipment and weapons. Dr. Amy Johnson was the ship's expert on biology and had spent years studying how life might develop on other worlds. She had dreamed of this moment since she was a child reading books about space exploration. Now that it was really happening, she felt scared and excited at the same time. The Pioneer's shuttle bay opened and released a small landing craft toward the moon. Jake piloted the shuttle himself while Dan and Amy sat behind him, watching the gray surface grow larger through the front window. The moon had no atmosphere, so they had to wear special suits that would let them breathe and protect them from radiation. They landed near the source of the signal and found themselves looking at something impossible. Buildings rose from the moon's surface in graceful curves and spirals, clearly made by intelligent hands but unlike anything humans had ever built. The structures looked like they had been grown rather than constructed, with smooth walls that reflected the light from the distant star. But something was wrong. Many of the buildings were broken, their walls cracked and collapsed. Debris lay scattered across what had once been streets and walkways. Whatever had happened here, it had been violent. "My God," Amy whispered through her suit radio. This was a city. Someone lived here. They walked carefully through the ruins, their boots crunching on fragments of the strange building material. Dan kept his weapon ready, though he wasn't sure what good human guns would do against alien threats. Jake recorded everything with his suit cameras, knowing that these images would change human understanding of the universe forever. At the center of the settlement, they found a building larger than the rest. Its entrance had been sealed, but the seal was broken now, leaving a gap just wide enough for a human to squeeze through. Jake went first, followed by Amy and then Dan. Inside, emergency lighting cast red shadows on the walls. The air was thin, but breathable, though their suits warned them about unknown particles in the atmosphere. They followed a corridor deeper into the building until they reached a large central room. That was where they found the alien. It lay on a raised platform, in the center of the room, connected to machines that beeped and flashed with dying energy. The creature was small, no bigger than a human child, but its body was like nothing on Earth. Its skin seemed to be made of living crystal that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. Soft blue light pulsed under its transparent, flesh in rhythm with its breathing. As they approached, the alien's eyes opened. They were large and dark, filled with intelligence and pain. It tried to speak, but no sound came from its mouth. Instead, it raised one delicate hand toward Amy. Amy understood somehow and reached out to touch the alien's fingers with her gloved hand. The moment they made contact, images flooded into her mind. She saw the alien's memories as clearly as if they were her own. She saw the settlement as it had been, a peaceful place where the aliens, who called themselves Villani, had lived and studied the stars. She saw their ships arriving at the moon, carrying families and scientists who wanted to build a new home far from their crowded homeworld. Then she saw the attackers come. The ships that fell from space were huge and dark, bristling with weapons and radiating menace. The beings that emerged from them were tall and brutal, with faces like wolves and hands like claws. They called themselves the Korathi Empire, and they had come to destroy. The Villani had tried to surrender, tried to negotiate, tried to run. Nothing worked. The Korathi wanted only death and destruction. They bombed the settlement from orbit, then landed troops to hunt down any survivors. The Villani were peaceful people who had never known war, and they died quickly under the Korathi assault. This alien, whose name was HFY, had been the settlement's leader. He had watched his people die and recorded their final moments, hoping that someday someone would find the truth and remember what had happened here. As the images faded from Amy's mind, HFY's light grew dimmer. His eyes found Jake's face, through the helmet visor, and somehow Jake understood that the alien was grateful they had come. Then the light went out forever, and the first alien humanity had ever met was dead. Amy pulled her hand away, tears flowing down her face inside her helmet. Jake and Dan stood in silence, understanding that they had witnessed something terrible and important. They had found proof that humanity was not alone in the universe. But they had also learned that the galaxy was a more dangerous place than anyone had imagined. The Korathi Empire was still out there somewhere, still destroying peaceful civilizations and spreading death across the stars. Earth needed to know about this threat, and humanity would have to decide what to do about it. Admiral Susan Clark walked into the Great Assembly Hall in Geneva and felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. Representatives from every nation on Earth sat in curved rows of seats, their faces turned toward the podium where she would speak. In her hand, she carried a small crystal device that contained the memories of HFY, the alien who had died on that distant moon. The hall fell silent as she approached the microphone. Behind her, a massive screen came to life, showing images that the crew of the Pioneer had recorded in the ruins of the Villani settlement. The representatives leaned forward in their seats, studying the alien architecture and the broken remains of a civilization that had been wiped out by an enemy they were only now learning about. Members of the United Earth Council, Admiral Clark, began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. 3 weeks ago, humanity made first contact with intelligent alien life. What we discovered has changed everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. She activated the crystal device, and HFY's memories began to play on the screen. The representatives watched in fascination as the images showed the Villani settlement in its peaceful days, with crystalline beings working together to build their new home among the stars. Children played in gardens that grew under artificial suns, while adults studied charts of distant galaxies and dreamed of exploring them. Then the scene changed, and the Korathi ships appeared in the sky like black daggers cutting through the light. The representatives gasped as they watched the brutal attack unfold, seeing peaceful beings destroyed by weapons that turned their crystal bodies to dust and their beautiful buildings to rubble. The Korathi Empire has been expanding across the galaxy for over 200 years, Admiral Clark continued as the horrible images played behind her. They follow the same pattern everywhere they go. They arrive at a world with intelligent life, demand complete surrender, and when the inhabitants refuse to become slaves, the Karathi destroy them utterly. Dr. Robert Hayes, who had spent the past 3 weeks studying every piece of information the pioneer had brought back, stood up at his seat near the front of the hall. "Admiral Clark, can you tell us how many species the Karathi have destroyed?" The screen changed to show a map of the galaxy, with red dots marking systems where the Karathi had struck. Based on the information we recovered from Zephai's memories, we estimate at least 12 entire civilizations have been wiped out, billions of thinking beings dead because they refused to bow down to Karathi rule. Council President Marcus Lee looked pale as he studied the map. "What do we know about their military strength?" "Their ships are large and heavily armed, but they rely on brute force rather than clever tactics," Admiral Clark replied. "They have grown lazy from centuries of fighting enemies who could not match their weapons. Every species they have faced so far was either peaceful like the Villani or too primitive to mount an effective defense." A representative from Japan raised her hand. "Are they heading toward Earth?" "Not yet, but their expansion pattern suggests they will reach our region of space within 50 years. However, we have reason to believe they may accelerate their timeline if they learn about us." The hall erupted in worried voices as representatives began talking among themselves. Some called for immediate military preparation, while others argued for trying to negotiate with the Karathi. A few suggested that humanity should hide and hope the aliens would pass them by. Admiral Clark waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. "The Karathi have never faced an opponent like humanity. We have spent thousands of years fighting wars against each other, developing weapons and tactics that no peaceful species would ever think to create. But more than that, we have something the Karathi do not understand." "What is that?" asked the representative from Brazil. "We have a conscience. Every major war in human history was followed by people saying, 'Never again.' We have learned to feel horror at the thought of genocide, even when it happens to strangers. The Karathi see other species as insects to be crushed. We see them as fellow thinking beings who deserve to live." The screen behind her changed again, showing images of human military ships and weapon systems. "I am recommending that the Council authorize the largest military mobilization in human history, not to conquer or enslave, but to stop the Karathi from destroying any more civilizations." The debate that followed lasted for 6 hours. Representatives argued about the cost, the risk, and the morality of intervening in conflicts between alien species. Some worried that attacking the Karathi would only bring their wrath down on Earth sooner. Others insisted that humanity had a duty to act when they learned about genocide. The decision came down to a vote. When the final tally was announced, the result was overwhelming. 847 votes in favor of military action, 23 against. Humanity would go to war against the Karathi Empire. Within hours of the vote, news of the Council's decision leaked to the public. Television stations and internet sites around the world showed the images from the Villani settlement, and people everywhere reacted with anger and determination. Protests filled the streets of major cities, but these were not protests against war. They were demonstrations demanding that the government act faster to stop the alien genocide. Young people lined up outside military recruitment centers, eager to volunteer for humanity's first interstellar war. Factory workers stayed late to retool their production lines for making weapons and spacecraft. Scientists worked around the clock to adapt human technology for fighting an enemy unlike any they had ever faced. The transformation was remarkable to watch. Nations that had been rivals for centuries suddenly found themselves working together with a single purpose. The old divisions between rich and poor, east and west, seemed to disappear in the face of a threat that made human differences look trivial. Admiral Clark found herself in charge of the newly created Human Liberation Force, with orders to build a fleet capable of fighting the Karathi across multiple star systems. She established her headquarters on the moon, where massive shipyards began constructing vessels designed specifically for deep space combat. The ships that emerged from these yards were unlike anything humanity had built before. They were sleek and fast, armed with weapons that could crack asteroids and protected by shields that could deflect the radiation of dying stars. More importantly, They were designed to work together as a coordinated force, sharing information and tactics in real time through quantum communication links. Captain Kevin Brooks was one of the first officers to receive command of these new warships. His vessel, the UES Thunder, was a heavy cruiser bristling with antimatter cannons and protected by overlapping energy shields. As he walked through his ship for the first time, he marveled at the technology that had been developed in just a few months. "Sir," his weapons officer, Lieutenant Rachel Green, said as she ran diagnostics on the ship's armament. "These guns are powerful enough to punch through a moon. Are we really going to need that kind of firepower?" Brooks looked out at the other ships taking shape in the orbital yards around them. "The Karathi have been the galaxy's bullies for 2 centuries, Rachel. They think they're the strongest species in the universe. We're going to teach them what happens when humans get angry." Meanwhile, on Mars, the largest weapons factories in human history worked day and night to produce ammunition and equipment for the growing fleet. Asteroid miners diverted their operations to gathering the rare metals needed for advanced weapon systems. Even civilian shipping companies volunteered their vessels to carry supplies to the military bases being built throughout the solar system. Dr. Amy Johnson, who had been present at humanity's first contact with alien life, now found herself leading a team of scientists working to understand Karathi technology. The memories that Zephi had shared included detailed information about Karathi ships and weapons, knowledge that could give humanity a crucial advantage in the coming war. Their shields are designed to stop the simple energy weapons that primitive species would use, she explained to a room full of military engineers. But they have never faced antimatter warheads or quantum disruptors. We can hurt them in ways they never expected. As the months passed, the Human Liberation Force grew from a desperate plan into a formidable military machine. Hundreds of ships filled the space around Earth and Mars, their crews training for battles that would determine the fate of entire civilizations. Admiral Clark stood on the observation deck of her flagship, the UES Retribution, and watched her fleet prepare for departure. Soon they would leave the safety of human space and venture into the unknown regions where the Karathi Empire ruled. They would face an enemy that had never known defeat, armed with weapons that had destroyed countless worlds. But they carried, with them, something more powerful than any weapon: the determination to stop genocide wherever they found it. Humanity had learned the hard way that evil flourished when good people did nothing. They would not make that mistake again. The news of humanity's victory at Zephyr spread across the galaxy like wildfire racing through dry grass. In the hidden colonies where survivors of extinct civilizations had fled to escape Karathi genocide, hope flickered to life for the first time in generations. On worlds where alien species lived under Karathi occupation, whispered conversations began about the possibility of freedom. Colonel Sarah Walsh had never expected to find herself leading the liberation of an entire planet, but that was exactly what happened when her Marines landed on Drakmor. The world had once been home to a peaceful species called the Miran, but the Karathi had wiped them out 50 years ago and turned their planet into a massive slave camp. Now millions of beings from a dozen different species worked in the mines and factories that covered Drakmor's surface. They had been captured during other Karathi conquests and brought here to labor until they died. The guards were brutal, the conditions were deadly, and escape was impossible. Until the humans arrived. Colonel Walsh crouched behind a boulder on a hill overlooking Mine Complex 7 and studied the target through her rifle scope. The complexy stretched for kilometers across the valley below, a maze of tunnels and processing plants where thousands of alien slaves dug precious metals from the planet's crust. Karathi guards patrolled the perimeter in powered armor, their weapons ready to kill any slave who stepped out of line. 37 guards visible from this position, reported Sergeant Pete Davis from his spot behind another boulder. Heavy weapons emplacements at the main gate and 4 corner towers. This isn't going to be easy. Walsh nodded as she continued her surveillance. The Karathi had built their slave camps to be escape-proof, with overlapping fields of fire and enough firepower to stop a small army, but they had never faced human Marines equipped with the latest combat technology. Alpha Team, move to position 2, she whispered into her radio. Beta Team, circle around to the back entrance. Charlie Team, you're with me on the main assault. Remember, the prisoners are the priority. We're here to free them, not to kill Karathi. The attack began at dawn when human shuttles dropped out of the cloudy sky and began strafing the guard towers with plasma fire. The Karathi guards ran for their weapons, thinking they were facing a conventional assault from above. They never saw the Marines who had been moving through the underground tunnel system all night. Walsh and her team emerged from a maintenance shaft inside the main compound and immediately began attacking the guard barracks. Human weapons designed for fighting in Earth's brutal wars cut through Karathi armor like paper. The alien guards who had terrorized slaves for decades found themselves facing an enemy that was faster, smarter, and infinitely more determined than anyone they had ever fought. "This is Alpha Team," came the voice of Lieutenant Mike Chen over the radio. "We have secured the eastern sector. Beginning prisoner evacuation now." Walsh smiled as she heard the sound of heavy doors being blown open and alien voices calling out in dozens of different languages. The slaves had been told that rescue was impossible, that the galaxy had forgotten them, that they would die in the mines of Drakmor. Now they were learning that sometimes impossible things happened when humans got angry enough. The fighting lasted only 2 hours before the last Karathi guard was dead or captured. When it was over, Colonel Walsh stood in the main courtyard of the complex and watched thousands of freed slaves streaming toward the human transport ships that had landed outside the compound. Many of them were so weak from years of forced labor that they had to be carried, but their eyes shone with something that had been missing for too long. Hope, an alien who introduced himself as Keeper Zeltar, approached Walsh as she supervised the evacuation. He was a member of a species called the Thurian, tall and thin with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. According to the records they had found, he had been a university professor before the Karathi captured his homeworld. "I must ask," Zeltar said in carefully pronounced English that he had learned by listening to human radio broadcasts. "Why do you risk your lives for strangers? Your species gains nothing from freeing us." Walsh looked out at the transport ships, loading with freed prisoners, and thought about the question. "We gain the knowledge that we did the right thing," she finally answered. "That's enough." The liberation of Drakmor was just one of hundreds of operations that human forces carried out across Karathi territory. Admiral Clark had divided her fleet into smaller task forces that could strike multiple targets simultaneously, stretching Karathi defenses beyond their breaking point. Each victory brought new allies to the human cause. The Althari, whose homeworld had been saved from destruction, offered their floating cities as mobile bases for human operations. The surviving Miran provided detailed maps of Karathi military installations. Other species contributed whatever they could: weapons, supplies, intelligence, or simply their gratitude. But the most important contribution came from the species that everyone had thought were extinct. Dr. Amy Johnson was studying biological samples in her laboratory aboard the UES Discovery when her assistant, Lieutenant Carol Anderson, burst through the door with excitement written all over her face. "Doctor, you need to see this transmission that just came in," Carol said as she activated the lab's communication screen. "It's from the Kepler system, but not from any human settlement." The screen flickered to life, showing the face of an alien that Amy recognized from the memories that Zeph High had shared with her. It was a Villani, the species that the Karathi had supposedly wiped out completely. "Greetings, humans of Earth," the Villani said, his crystalline features shining with inner light. "I am Elder Tefidal of the Hidden Fleet. We have watched your war against the Karathi with great interest. The time has come for us to reveal ourselves and join your fight." Amy felt her heart racing as she processed what she was hearing. "Hidden Fleet? How many of you survived?" "When the Karathi attacked our world, some of us escaped in ships that we had hidden in the deep space between stars," Elder Tefidal explained. "We have been building our strength for decades, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Your victories have shown us that the moment has arrived." Over the following weeks, hidden fleets from a dozen supposedly extinct civilizations emerged from their hiding places and declared their intention to join the war against the Karathi. Each species brought unique capabilities that enhanced humanity's growing coalition. The Villani had developed advanced stealth technology that could hide entire fleets from enemy sensors. The Kethmor, survivors of a warrior culture, provided elite soldiers trained in boarding operations. The Yildan contributed ships that could travel faster than any human vessel. The Karathi Empire, which had ruled through fear for 2 centuries, suddenly found itself facing an enemy unlike anything in its experience. This was not a single species, fighting for its own survival, but an alliance of civilizations united by their hatred of genocide and their determination to see justice done. Admiral Clark stood in the command center of her new flagship, the UES Vengeance, and studied the tactical display that showed the positions of Allied forces throughout Karathi space. Red dots marked enemy strongholds, while blue and green symbols showed human and Allied fleets moving to attack them. It looked like a game of 3-dimensional chess played on a galactic scale. Admiral, her intelligence officer, Commander Janet Phillips, reported from her station. "We're receiving reports of Karathi fleet movements near their core systems. It appears they are pulling back their outer defenses and concentrating their forces." Clark nodded as she considered the implications. "They're preparing for a last stand. How many ships do our scouts estimate they have left?" "Approximately 1,000 vessels, including their planet-killer weapons and fortress ships," Phillips replied. "They're gathering everything around their homeworld of Teknara." The thought of facing 1,000 enemy ships should have been terrifying, but Clark felt only determination. The Karathi had spent centuries perfecting the art of destroying civilizations. Now they would learn what happened when those civilizations fought back. "Send a message to all Allied commanders," she ordered. "Tell them to prepare their fleets for the final assault. The Karathi Empire ends at Teknara." As the orders went out across the galaxy, millions of beings who had suffered under Karathi rule began to prepare for the battle that would decide their fate. In the shipyards of liberated worlds, workers labored around the clock to repair damaged vessels and build new ones. In the training camps where freed slaves learned to fight, instructors pushed their students harder than ever before. On Earth, the news of the approaching final battle was met with solemn determination. Everyone knew that this would be the bloodiest fight of the war, that many humans would not come home alive. But they also knew that failure was not an option. Too many species had already been destroyed by Karathi genocide. The killing had to stop, no matter what the cost. Colonel Walsh received her new orders while she was overseeing the establishment of a refugee camp on a liberated world. She would be taking her Marines to Teknara as part of the largest military operation in galactic history. As she packed her equipment and prepared to leave, she thought about all the freed slaves she had met. The Zephyr system hung in space like a collection of jewels scattered across black velvet. 3 planets orbited a yellow star similar to Earth's sun, while asteroid belts and gas clouds drifted between them in slow, ancient patterns. It should have been a peaceful place, but Admiral Susan Clark knew that death was coming here. Her intelligence officers had intercepted Karathi communications, indicating that a large enemy fleet was moving toward Zephyr. The 3rd planet was home to a species called the Althari, who had built their civilization around floating cities that rode the upper atmosphere of their gas giant world. According to the intercepted messages, the Karathi planned to demand surrender in 3 days, then begin orbital bombardment when the Althari refused. The Human Liberation Force had arrived first. Admiral Clark stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution and studied the tactical display that showed her fleet's positions. 200 ships floated in the darkness beyond the system's edge, hidden behind a gas cloud that would mask their energy signatures until they chose to reveal themselves. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, but she wondered if it would be enough. "Admiral," her communications officer, Lieutenant Tony Martinez, called from his station. "We're receiving a transmission from the Althari homeworld. They want to know who we are." Clark had been dreading this moment. How do you explain to an alien species that you have come to fight a war in their system? How do you tell them that their world has become a battlefield whether they want it or not? "Put them through," she said. The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of what appeared to be a Althari command center. The beings on the screen were tall and graceful, with flowing robes that seemed to move even in the still air. Of their floating cities, their faces were elongated and intelligent, with large eyes that held an ancient wisdom. "I am Speaker Velthara of the Althari Council," said the alien in the center of the screen. Her voice was melodic, like wind chimes singing in a gentle breeze. Your ships were detected entering our system. Are you the Karathi who have been demanding our submission? No, Admiral Clark replied. We are humans, from a world called Earth. We have come to warn you that the Karathi fleet is approaching this system. They intend to destroy your civilization unless you surrender to them. Speaker Velthara's eyes widened with something that might have been fear. We know of the Karathi. Stories of their cruelty have reached even our distant world. But why do you warn us? What do you gain from involving yourselves in our fate? We gain nothing except the knowledge that we tried to stop genocide, Clark answered. The Karathi have destroyed 12 other civilizations. We will not allow them to destroy a 13th. The Althari Council members spoke among themselves in their musical language, their voices rising and falling like a chorus. Finally, Speaker Velthara turned back to the screen. We are a peaceful people. Our cities float in the sky because we chose long ago to live apart from conflict and war. We have no weapons that could fight the Karathi fleet. You won't need them, Admiral Clark said. We will fight for you. Before Speaker Velthara could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the Retribution's bridge. Lieutenant Sandra Hayes at the sensor station looked up with excitement and fear in her eyes. Admiral, we have multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Configuration matches Karathi fleet signatures. Admiral Clark felt her heart rate increase as she turned to study the tactical display. Red dots were appearing on the screen like drops of blood, each one representing an enemy ship. As she watched, the count climbed higher. 20 ships, 30, 40. When it finally stopped, 37 Karathi vessels hung in space between the human fleet and the Althari homeworld. My God, whispered Captain Kevin Brooks from his position aboard the heavy cruiser UES Thunder. Look at the size of those things. The Karathi ships were massive, dark constructions that looked more like space stations than military vessels. The smallest were the size of human battleships, while the largest stretched over a kilometer from bow to stern. Their hulls were black as midnight, covered with weapon ports and armor plating that made them look like mechanical predators. All ships, this is Admiral Clark, she announced over the fleet communication channel. Take positions according to Battle Plan Alpha. Wait for my signal before engaging. The human fleet moved like a school of fish, each ship adjusting its position, in perfect coordination with the others. They had trained for this moment for months, running simulation after simulation until every captain knew exactly where to be and when to be there. Captain Brooks guided the Thunder into position at the front of the formation, his weapons crews ready at their stations. This is it, people, he announced to his crew over the ship's internal communication system. Everything we've trained for comes down to the next few hours. Make every shot count. The Karathi fleet arranged itself in a traditional attack formation, with the largest ships in the center and smaller vessels forming a protective screen around them. It was the same formation they had used against every other species they had conquered. A display of overwhelming force designed to break enemy morale before the first shot was fired. From the largest Karathi ship, a transmission began broadcasting on all frequencies. The voice that spoke was harsh and guttural, filled with the arrogance of a species that had never known defeat. I am Admiral Thekvar of the Karathi Empire, the voice announced. Inferior species of this system you will surrender your worlds and your people to Karathi rule. Those who submit immediately will be granted the mercy of quick death. Those who resist will watch their worlds burn. Speaker Velthara's image appeared on screens throughout the human fleet as she responded to the Karathi demand. We are a peaceful people. We have done nothing to threaten your empire. Please leave us in peace. Admiral Thekvar's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass. Peace is for the weak. The strong take what they wish and destroy what they cannot use. Your cities will make beautiful funeral pyres. That was when Captain Brooks decided he had heard enough. This is Captain Kevin Brooks of the Human Liberation Force, he announced on an open channel. We have a message for the Karathi Empire. The response from Admiral Thekvar came quickly. What pathetic species dares to interfere with Karathi? Justice? This is humanity, Brooks replied, his voice steady and cold. We don't surrender. The battle began 30 seconds later. The human fleet emerged from behind the gas cloud like avenging angels, their ships moving in perfect formation as they accelerated toward the Karathi line. The enemy had been expecting to face primitive vessels with simple weapons, the kind of ships that every other species had used in their futile attempts to resist Karathi expansion. Instead, they met the fury of humanity unleashed. The first human weapons to fire were the long-range antimatter missiles launched from the destroyer UES Lightning. The missiles streaked across the void at near light speed, their warheads designed to punch through the thickest armor ever created. When they struck the leading Karathi ships, the explosions lit up space like miniature suns. The Karathi shields, which had been designed to stop the energy weapons of primitive civilizations, crumpled under the focused power of human antimatter warheads. Holes appeared in the massive alien hulls, venting atmosphere and debris into the vacuum. But the Karathi were not defenseless. Their return fire filled space with beams of destructive energy that could boil oceans and crack continents. The human ships twisted and dove through the barrage, their advanced maneuvering systems allowing them to dodge attacks that should have been impossible to avoid. Captain Brooks brought the Thunder into close combat with a Karathi heavy cruiser, his ship dancing around the larger vessel like a boxer fighting a giant. The Thunder's plasma cannons fired in continuous streams, each shot eating away at the enemy's armor until the alien ship's hull began to glow cherry red from the heat. "Target their weapon ports," Brooks ordered his gunners. "Take away their teeth." The human ships fought with a coordination the Karathi had never seen before. When one vessel was threatened by multiple enemies, others would move to support it without being asked. When a human ship found a weakness in Karathi defenses, that information was instantly shared with every other ship in the fleet. Admiral Tekvar watched his formation crumble with growing disbelief. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his bridge crew. "These ships are tiny compared to ours. How are they winning?" His weapons officer, a scarred veteran of a dozen conquests, studied his tactical displays with confusion. "Admiral, they fight as if they are one organism with many bodies. Our ships cannot match their coordination." The tide of battle turned decisively when the human heavy cruisers concentrated their fire on the Karathi flagship. Admiral Tekvar's massive dreadnought, which had been the terror of countless worlds, found itself surrounded by smaller but infinitely more agile opponents. The human ships poured fire into the flagship from every angle, their quantum disruptors tearing apart the molecular bonds that held the Karathi armor together. "Impossible," Admiral Tekvar whispered as his ship shuddered under the human assault. "We are the masters of the galaxy. We cannot be defeated by unknown primitives." But defeat was exactly what happened. The Karathi homeworld of Theknara hung in space like a metal moon wrapped in chains of light. Massive orbital defense platforms circled the planet in precise formations, each one bristling with weapons that could crack asteroids and shields, that could deflect the radiation of dying stars. The planet's surface was hidden beneath a dome of energy that pulsed with deadly power, generated by shield emitters scattered across every continent. Admiral Susan Clark stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance and studied the tactical display that showed the enemy defenses. In all her years of military service, she had never seen anything so formidable. The Karathi had turned their homeworld into the ultimate fortress, a place where they could make their final stand against the alliance that had shattered their empire. "Final count shows 1,247 enemy vessels," reported Commander Janet Phillips from her intelligence station. "They have everything from patrol boats to planet killers arranged in defensive formations around the orbital platforms." Clark nodded as she absorbed the numbers. Against this overwhelming force, the Allied fleet could muster only 847 ships. Many of the Allied vessels were smaller than their Karathi counterparts, and some were damaged from previous battles. On paper, the defenders held every advantage, but Admiral Clark had not come this far to be defeated by numbers on a screen. "All ships, this is Admiral Clark," she announced over the fleet communication channel. "You all know what we face here today. The Karathi have gathered every ship, every weapon, every last bit of their military might to protect their homeworld. They think their defenses are unbreakable. They think we will hesitate when we see the odds against us." She paused and looked out at the stars where hundreds of ships waited for her orders. Human vessels floated alongside Villani stealth ships, Althari mobile platforms, and vessels from a dozen other species that had thought themselves extinct until the Alliance gave them hope. "They are wrong," she continued. "We did not come here to count ships or measure firepower. We came here to end genocide. We came here to ensure that no other peaceful civilization will ever again face extinction at Karathi hands. Today we finish what they started when they decided that might makes right." The first phase of the battle began when Captain Ryan Mitchell's experimental stealth ship, the UES Ghost, slipped past the outer defenses like a shadow moving through moonlight. The Ghost was humanity's most advanced vessel, equipped with technology that bent light around its hull and masked its energy signature from even the most sensitive sensors. Mitchell had volunteered for the most dangerous mission of the war, penetrating the Karathi defensive perimeter and disabling the planetary shield generators that protected Theknara's surface. Without those shields, the Allied fleet could target the ground installations that powered the orbital defense platforms. "Passing through the outer sensor grid now," Mitchell whispered into his radio as the Ghost drifted between two massive Karathi battleships. "No sign that they've detected us." The stealth ship moved deeper into the defensive formation, threading its way between enemy vessels like a fish swimming through a school of sharks. Mitchell's crew worked in absolute silence, knowing that the slightest mistake would alert the entire Karathi fleet to their presence. It took 4 hours for the Ghost to reach its target, a series of shield generator installations built into the mountains of Theknara's largest continent. The facilities were heavily guarded, but the Karathi had never expected an attack to come from orbit. Their defenses were designed to stop ground assaults, not precision strikes from space. "Target acquired," Mitchell reported as his weapons officer lined up the shot. "Firing now." Quantum torpedoes streaked down from the Ghost's concealed position, their warheads designed to disrupt the molecular bonds that held matter together. When they struck the shield generators, the installation simply ceased to exist, leaving craters where massive power plants had stood moments before. The planetary shields flickered and died, leaving Theknara vulnerable for the first time in its history. That was when the real battle began. The Allied fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their ships arranged in attack patterns that had been practiced hundreds of times in simulation. At the center of the formation, Admiral Clark's flagship led the human contingent toward the enemy lines. To her left, Elder Tefadal commanded the Villani Shadow Fleet, their ships appearing and disappearing like ghosts as their stealth systems activated and deactivated. To her right, the surviving warriors of the Kethmore civilization charged forward in their battle-scarred vessels, eager to avenge their destroyed homeworld. The Karathi response was immediate and overwhelming. 1,000 ships opened fire simultaneously, filling space with beams of energy that could boil oceans and missiles that could level mountains. The void between the fleets lit up like the heart of a star, as weapons that had destroyed countless civilizations unleashed their fury against the Alliance. But the Alliance did not break. Human ships danced through the barrage with inhuman precision, their advanced computers calculating safe paths through the storm of death. Villani vessels flickered in and out of visibility, striking at enemy flanks before vanishing again. The liberated species fought with the desperate courage of people who knew this was their only chance for justice. Supreme Karathi Commander Velthor watched the battle unfold from his command ship, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed everything else in the system. He had spent his entire life believing that the Karathi were the galaxy's master race, destined to rule over all other species. Now he watched that belief crumble as his inferior enemies tore through his defenses. How is this possible? He demanded of his tactical officer. We outnumber them. Our ships are larger and more heavily armed. Why are we losing? The tactical officer, a veteran of dozens of successful conquests, studied his displays with growing confusion. Commander, they fight as if they care more about victory than survival. Our warriors seek to preserve themselves so they can enjoy their conquests. These aliens seem willing to die to achieve their goals. Velthor's eyes narrowed as he processed this information. It was true that Karathi military doctrine emphasized overwhelming force and self-preservation. Why risk your life in dangerous, maneuvers when superior firepower could win battles safely, but the Alliance fleet moved with a reckless courage that made Karathi caution look like cowardice. The tide of battle turned when Colonel Sarah Walsh led her Marine assault teams against the orbital defense platforms, human boarding craft, protected by Volani stealth fields and escorted by Kethmore fighters, penetrated the platform's defenses and delivered their deadly cargo directly to the enemy strongholds. Walsh kicked down the airlock door of Defense Platform 7 and charged into the corridor beyond, her assault rifle spitting death at the Karathi guards who rushed to meet her. Behind her, 50 of humanity's finest Marines followed, their weapons cutting through alien armor like it was made of paper. "Remember," she shouted over the sound of gunfire, "we need to reach the command center and shut down their weapons. Every minute those guns stay active, more of our ships die." The fighting through the platform's corridors was brutal and close quarters, exactly the kind of combat that human Marines excelled at. The Karathi had size and strength advantages, but humans had speed, training, and most importantly, the absolute determination to win at any cost. When Walsh and her team finally reached the command center, they found it defended by a dozen elite Karathi warriors in powered armor. The aliens fought with desperate fury, knowing that the fall of their platform would leave a gap in their defenses that the Alliance could exploit. But desperation was not enough. Walsh and her Marines had trained for this moment, had studied Karathi tactics and weaknesses until they knew their enemy better than the Karathi knew themselves. In less than 10 minutes, the command center was theirs, and Defense Platform 7's massive guns fell silent. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as human Marines captured platform after platform. Each victory opened new holes in the Karathi defenses, allowing Allied ships to push deeper into the enemy formation. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Captain Lisa Park, the communications officer who had first detected the Volani distress signal, now commanded her own ship in the Allied fleet. The UES Pioneer, the same vessel that had made humanity's first contact with alien life, had been refitted as a command and control ship equipped with the most advanced electronics. In human space, Admiral Clark, Park transmitted as her ship penetrated the enemy rear lines. "I have a clear shot at their command vessel, requesting permission to engage." Clark looked at her tactical display and saw that Park's ship was completely surrounded by enemy vessels. Any attack on the Karathi flagship would be suicide. But she also knew that eliminating Velthor might cause the enemy fleet to surrender, saving thousands of lives on both sides. "Permission granted," Clark replied. "Make it count, Lisa." The Pioneer's final charge was a thing of beauty and terror. Park's ship accelerated directly toward the Karathi command vessel, its shields glowing white-hot as enemy weapons pounded against them. The ship's hull began to buckle under the assault, but Park held her course with iron determination.